We are going live into Christoph's lab at Abel and Schaefer, and he is going to show you how to bake and how to handle artisan breads. Here is Christoph.
Well, hello, Lynn, and everybody out there out west at BAKERpedia, and welcome to New York, or Long Island, New York, where we are located at Abel and Schaefer. We are here in our test bakery lab, where all our products are developed and also, of course, tested. So about the whole artisan baking webinar that was going on, I want to try to give you some pointers and some good ideas, particularly also promoting or featuring a certain products for real true artisan baking. Artisan baking can be done, as we know, with regular yeast, but the old world of artisan baking from way back then was with what they call wild yeast, or the French call it levain, the German sourdough, which is basically an active mother dough or starter. And we have a product developed. It's produced in Germany, which is called masa madre, basically the Spanish name for mother dough. And we use that today instead of yeast. So all the products I'm going to show, or that we're going to feature in the next 30-40 minutes, are made with that masa madre, a natural occurring wild yeast. So it's not a commercial yeast. It's a little bit more different to work with, a little bit more time consuming, but well worth it in terms of the results, shelf life, flavor of the product, overall appearance, and so on. So I have it right here. It's actually, as you can see, comes packaged. It's a powder. It's basically wild yeast, spores, and the starter culture basically plated on wheat flour. It's not nothing else, nothing than that. And it's mixed with water at a certain ratio. It's all in our instructions. And it's fermented between 14 and 18 hours. We can go even up to 20 hours. It's very tolerant. And this is basically your pre-ferment, or your levain, your Polish, your biga, whatever you want to call it, but it has no real commercial yeast. It's the wild yeast starter. So that's pretty much what we're going to show. I'm just going to. I have prepared a little bit of a small dough that actually Lynn asked me to use her onions in it. This is a rustic rye dough. It has rye flour, salt, a little bit of butter, and the brown side here is our rye sour. That gives you a little bit of acidity, which would be in a natural sourdough naturally occurring. But in this case, we have a completely natural dehydrated sourdough. It's produced just the same way as all the sourdoughs are made. Long-time fermentation. It's fed over many steps, many times over about 2 weeks, until it's very active in terms of the acidity level and the pH. And then it's dehydrated in one of our plants in Germany, and it's shipped here. And we use it in all our artisan bread mixes. I don't refer to bread mix really. We call it often also like artisan bread blends, because it's really only ingredients that are pre-blended, and the baker has it a little bit easier. Doesn't have to do the scaling. So basically, that's what it is. The recipe is actually on the recipe brochure, so we don't have to talk about it. But what we will need is actually a certain amount of the masa madre, which is then our yeast or our leavening agent. It is yeast, but it's a wild yeast, as we know. So in this case, I actually need 1,500 grams. And I'm just going to use a little water. That's easier. Instead of flour, makes it less sticky. And you can see how bubbly and how active it is. Very close. I'm at 1650. That's good. So a little bit less. So now, when you bake with regular yeast, everything goes a little faster. In this case, everything goes a little slower, and this is actually what's nice about the artisan baking. Slow, long fermentation that gives a lot of flavors, that develops a lot of aromas. It's I compare it a little bit to beer brewing or winemaking. Kind of the same idea.
I have a question for you.
Oh, absolutely.
And I want to encourage the rest of the participants here to ask questions during this process on what he's doing so that we make it a little more interactive for Christoph.
Sure.
Now,
If I
this
can,
particular starter, did you just start it by itself?
I'm sorry?
This particular starter, did you just start it by itself? Like
I started, no, I mixed it. I started it last night. So it
oh,
takes
wow,
about,
that's fast.
yeah, it takes 14 to 18 hours because
Okay.
all the wild yeast bacteria are already developed. So it's an active dry levain based on wild yeast. It's not commercial yeast. So it's a completely different strain. And it takes about 14 to 18 hours. You can stretch it even to 20, 22 hours if you want to use it throughout the day. And then the next day you use it as your pre-ferment / leavening agent.
Yeah, and I was just, thinking that sometimes this is going to help with order insertions in artisan bakeries, and it's going to help last minute orders where they don't have time to, do the traditional starter for like 30, 40 hours. They can just start it up, 14 hours prior to delivery.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Exactly.
I mean,
so it can be also changed in terms of the fermentation speed. If I wanted to move a little bit faster, I can use a little bit more. In general, we use about the same amount as flour. So if we use a recipe with 5 pounds of flour, I use 5 pounds of starter.
okay.
And then, of course, I need to calculate the right amount of salt and other ingredients. So it is added to the right ratio for the flavor and for the texture, of course.
Great. So if anybody else has any questions on the Masa Madre production, just go ahead and put in the Q&A section. And also any questions on what Christoph is doing right now.
So to this rustic rye dough, we're going to add these onions that Lynn has sent to me. And I know that brand from way back in Germany also. Very nice and crispy, very flavorful. And they work very well with the rye flavor in a rye bread. They work well with other grain breads, of course, any kind of different breads. But for the rye particularly is really nice. Long shelf life, dry, not a problem for storage. Doesn't need to be cooled or anything. So what I also recommend for any artisan baking, even if it's with yeast or with starter, it doesn't matter. I prefer a long, slow mixing versus a fast mixing. A gentle dough development versus a high-speed oxidation. It gives the dough more time to develop. It takes basically care of the gluten development in a more gentle way. And what it also does, especially in white doughs, it preserves the carotenoid pigments of the flour. It will give you a little bit more creamy color, a little bit more flavor. It's just not as white, not as oxidized. So, but that's more a preference thing. It's just the old way of mixing, I want to say. And that's a nice way to do it, of course. Long and then a short, fast mix is usually better. Now it depends also what type of dough. Of course, if it's with grains, it takes a little longer to hydrate anyway. So this usually mixes about 2 minutes, 3 minutes in slow speed, and then I add maybe a minute or so or two in fast speed. Comes together very fast. That's also because the usage of the masa madre ferment, because it's a big portion that has pre-fermented. It's almost like if you know, if you've ever heard about the Odderly's method, where flour and water is combined and it actually pre-hydrates. This is what happens in the masa madre sort of too. So you shorten the mixing time of the final dough. It gives you, it's a big advantage, of course, and gives you more flavor and less oxidation. So we're just gonna add these onions. this is a very small spiral mixer, but for the demonstration purpose, it works very well. And they just get folded in. Now it depends what spiral mixer you have. If you have a reverse feature, then it's easier to actually get them incorporated with the reverse gear. But I'm just going to switch it quickly to fast so it gets better incorporated. And that's about as much as I will mix it in fast speed to get a good proper development. And the dough is pretty much done in about half a minute. And then it takes up to 2-3 hours of bulk fermentation to be able to actually get the proper relaxing of the dough and the proper fermentation level in order to scale it, which is the next step we're going to do. So I'm going to stop this one so we can move on to the next step, which is the dough already proofed. You can move over with the camera, so you can open them up. They're a little bit over now. That's what they look like, but they're just fine. They're just in a small bowl. We have here 4 different versions of dough. This is the onion rye that we're just mixing. And they have been now sitting here about 3 hours. This is a sprouted grain blend with sunflower seeds. This is a whole grain spelt. Now we go into that ancient grain a little bit. And then we have the next one, the dark one, is a purple wheat. So the purple wheat is known for its antioxidant powers and values. It's almost like all the berries, red berries that are known. They call them also a little bit the super fruits. So we took a little bit of a different variation of grain bread. So you can see everything can be made with masa madre with no commercial yeast. And but it takes a little bit longer. And then also regular white dough can be made. We have it right there. I'll bring it over. And this could be then made into baguettes. It could be made into focaccia, regular white boule, French country loaves, anything sort of rustic and white. And it's a pretty soft dough. The hydration of the final dough was about 82%, including, and then of course with the masa madre sponge. So we're going to start scaling. I'm going to have Christina helping me out. Just move over to this side for you. You want to scale from here? That's fine. So we can see a little bit. What I usually do, I give it a little bit of a flattening and just a little fold, and then we're just going to scale it. Now this bread, this type of bread, I usually do about 600 grams. You notice I'm speaking in metrics. That's a little bit easier for me, but it's about 1.5 pounds roughly. And that's kind of an appropriate size for a product like this. But weights, of course, will always change. You can make them as big as you want or as small as you want. So what I do the pre-shape after the scaling. Now, in this case, I'm going to make some longer or oblong shaped loaves. So I'm going to just keep them a little bit round for the pre-shape. A little dusting flour. By the way, I prefer rye flour for dusting. It has a nicer texture and also a better separation effect in terms of the not making the dough stick. So this is the pre-shape. Very important to have a pre-shape, and then after that a bench rest. So that wild natural yeast can sort of start to redevelop, because now what we did, we sort of knocked out all the CO2 and we redistributed the yeast cells and spores. We evened out the temperature of the dough. Now we can start and do its work just again. Basically just like regular yeast would do. Everything is sort of the same, except that it just takes much longer or somewhat longer. So this is our whole grain spelt. The spelt being sort of in the ancient grain category, has been cultivated way before the wheat we know it today. Some people that actually have not celiac disease, but have a gluten sensitivity, because we don't call it allergy, it's really a sensitivity or intolerance. Some people say they can actually eat the spelt. Some don't, but it's apparently a little bit more tolerable for people with that.
So can I ask you, is that 100% spelt that you use?
This is 100% whole grain spelt, yes.
Okay.
And if you take a close look, we have some sunflower seeds.
Oh, nice.
And some spelt flakes as well in there. So all our blends, I want to also emphasize that, are all natural. We don't use any emulsifiers. We don't use any enzymes. We don't use any sort of preservatives or anything like that. So these are just grain blends or pre-blends, and we also call them from scratch blends. So to basically give out that notion of the artisan baking.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it comes to artisan baking, sometimes people are afraid when they hear mixes or ready-to-use products, they're loaded with some bad ingredients or well, they are out there, yes, but not everywhere. So we don't have them. We'll put them aside. So this one is a sprouted grain blend. So it's a blend of sprouted flours and sprouted grains, whole grains, and sprouted flakes. The sprouted got more and more sort of popular in the last few years, or maybe not only the last few years, but for a while now. And that is something that we actually sell pretty good.
Did you experience a increase in hydration with the sprouted grains?
A little bit, yes. There's a little bit more hydration, where it needs a little bit more water to, and it actually soaks it up a little bit afterwards as well.
Okay.
So I start with a little bit of a softer dough, and after the 3 hours, it feels actually fairly tight. I mean, you can work well with it, but it's a little bit on the tight side. Could actually have used a little bit more water. And here's that onion rye we just mixed, which is still in the mixer. And you have the onions nicely distributed.
Nice. That looks like a good dough.
And you can smell the onions actually, yep. Now we have also the white dough. Now this is also about close to the first ones were, this was the first one. This is close to 4.5 hours of fermentation time. I folded it 2-3 times during that whole time. So
I have a question for you on that. What happens if you don't fold during fermentation?
If you don't fold it?
Yeah.
The dough gets a little bit, basically it goes a little wild. It sort of eventually starts to collapse, fall down. The folding sort of increases, you introduce oxygen and you give it a little bit more strength. It tightens up.
Folding on the artisan scale is kind of like controlling the dough so that it doesn't go all over the place, right?
Yep. You in the same time also redistribute while you knock out some of the CO2, you redistribute the yeast cells so they can go to parts of the dough that they weren't before. And in the same time, you're adding new fresh oxygen. So it's food for the yeast again. So because the yeast needs nutrients, so it's got all the sugars and everything in the flour and the dough, and then it needs the air to breathe. So it can continue to do its nice work. So if you don't do it, it sort of sometimes, especially with the wild yeast, it sort of stops and turns dormant. And if you do that fold, it sort of gives it, it wakes it up, it gives it a little bit more power and sort of kicks it into motion again.
Mm-hmm.
And gives you a more fluffy interior of the dough. You can feel it's very gassy. So we're just going to do some basic country loaves with that. I usually scale them about 350 grams. Just going to put this aside here. Now in this case, I'm just going to give a very, very gentle, because I want to preserve that fluffy, gassy interior, I'm just going to give it a very gentle folding over itself for the pre-shape and put it on my boards. So now this could be a board with cornmeal, this could be any kind of surface that is a sort of non-stick, a couche. And we can see actually what the great advantages is of that method with the masa madre ferment, or any kind of pre-fermented method. The product gets very stable. It really has a lot of stability. I can still handle it. It doesn't collapse on me, but it's nice and fluffy. And I can go really, really long with the final fermentation to get the maximum volume out of it with maximum opening of the cell structure in the final product.
Okay.
So at this point here, what we have, we can leave them here again. It's very tolerant. We can leave them here for about 2, 3, 4 hours at room temperature, covered. If I want to just have round loaves and bake them as I need them. The bakers in France do that a lot with their baguettes, where the product
overproof though, Christoph?
It actually, it sometimes seems overproof, but it's not. It's amazing how tolerant and stable that product is.
Interesting. So can you do the same with the yeasted doughs?
With yeasted dough, it's not quite as tolerant.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
There's probably a science behind. You probably know better than I do. That for some reason it gives you that long, slow fermentation must strengthen up the proteins, the gluten. Everything gets stronger and tighter. And this is not even a high gluten flour, by the way. I prefer using a nice spring pattern flour.
Yep.
With about of a 55 ash and about 11.5% protein.
Yeah, there's still not too much research and science into proof tolerant bacterial strains. I mean, that's not much studies into it. Yeah. So I think I get an idea into the biochemical pathways on what they actually ferment. And part of overproofing is because you ferment too much. So there is a limiting factor to that, but I'm not so sure about the science behind that. But it's good to know that, you know, your masa madre product actually is more proof tolerant.
It's very, very proof tolerant. And then actually, I didn't know that in the beginning when we developed the product over in Germany and with all our colleagues. And we did many tests, different types of applications. And we wanted to, we really stretched the proofing or even the fermenting of the masa madre sponge itself up to 25, 26 hours. Eventually it's going to collapse and it loses its strength too. But up to 20 hours, it's fine. But then the proofing of the final dough, of the final shaped product can actually be stretched from 4 to 8 hours. And the product almost looks like it would collapse before it goes in the oven. And it has that stability and it pops in the oven beautifully. So that's the advantage of that, yeah.
Wow.
And we don't really know exactly why that is, but it's good.
Absolutely, it's good. I like ferment proofing tolerant dough products. It gives
Yes.
you more margin of error to work with.
So with all these products now, because we only have that limited time, I actually made a batch this morning, and same way everything, and it's in the proof box, and it's actually ready to go to the oven. Should be. I just turned the proof box off before. So I guess we're going to start with, yeah, this looks like, this is the whole grain spelt. Now you can see, I pre-shaped it round and usually let it sit for about an hour or 45 minutes, and then I reshape it again. Could be a long loaf. And then I put it on cloths, on couches. Now that's optional, but sort of the traditional way that I'm used to, and that is often done in Europe that way. So I use that, and gives it a nice a surface to actually ferment on, and it makes a nice top of the bread with the flour, and it crackles a little bit, so you can cut it. There's different ways, of course, to do it. I'm just going to take this. We have a little bit limited space here, so. So I'm going to take one of our loaders. Now this is also an important thing in artisan baking. It's not a must, but it's something that I prefer if you have it, obviously. Deck oven with a hearth, with a stone hearth, but in the same time also being able to bake on the stone directly, not on sheet pans. It just makes a difference. So I usually just take a little flour, dust, because it's a little bit on the wet side. But this is the same size we had before, and it is proofed. To me, this is a good proof, but it has stability. There's no chance that it would collapse unless I would smack it. So there's no problems with that. So now this is the seam of the bread. Obviously, if I bake it like this, it will crack open, give me a nice rustic appearance. I can also just bake it the regular way. I'm going to turn about 2 or 3 and cut it either with a knife or with a lom, and give it a special appearance. Now, even with the cutting, I can see the bread has a nice gassy interior, nice fluffy interior, but there's stability. There's no chance of collapsing, and give me a nice oven spring. It's usually a little better with the lom. There you go. So you can do with the scoring, of course, any kind of design you like. That's your sort of special signature to the bread. You can dust more flour on it with the sifter. You can sprinkle it on by hand. Man, that really is up to you. If you put flour on before baking, put the flour first and then score, not the other way. A lot of people I've seen doing that. And then if I sprinkle flour on it now, it goes into my cut, and it actually sort of makes it look a little bit weird, because if the flour is first and the cut comes then I have a nice contrast between the floured side and the open cut. And then we're just going to go in the oven. What I like to do with artisan breads, it's a fairly hot bake, so in this case I go with 430 degrees and about 10 to 15 seconds of steam. I'm just going to slide it in. And I have 10 seconds, I'll do 15. Okay, and start. So the 430, 440, and I usually, after 5 minutes, I turn the oven down to 400, sort of a falling heat. The hot oven will give me now a good hot surface from the bottom. It will automatically give me a lot of heat going through the loaf and give me then the maximum volume that I can ask for. So that it really pops. Here we have the rye bread that we actually before. We mixed it, then we pre-shaped it, and now it's actually proofed. I'm just going to squeeze a little bit the seams. They opened up a little bit. That's actually a sign of a strong dough. Again, again, the masa madre helps a lot in that.
When you say it's a sign of a strong dough, and you said it was a pretty low in protein, what percentage protein do you think it is?
The flour that we use?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the protein is about 11.5.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Yeah. To get that kind of strength.
So this is another way of proofing, of course, the baskets. That's really a preference. I like it because it looks good. Makes gives a nice appearance with the lines. Again, I mentioned before, I prefer rye flour, and for baskets, it's even better to use rye flour than regular wheat flour. It has a better, what I call that separation effect. So your loaves just fall out of the basket. And with the white flour, it's sometimes not quite as easy. They stick a little bit. Same here, a little cut. Anywhere you like. Again, the scoring is the signature of the bread, signature of the baker. And the lambs work always better because they're very sharp. A knife sort of sometimes grips the surface and almost rips the surface as well. Do the same thing. Doing the upper deck. The light is not working up there, so that's why it's dark. So now this is that purple wheat that we had before, and as you can see, also there's some walnuts in there. Again, proofed on the push.
Nice.
And now there's the other way the French usually do the flipping for their baguettes. And I use it for the breads too. So as you can see, nicely proofed, nice volume, and good stability. Now with regular yeast, this might be actually overproofed already, and it could collapse on you. Now this one's sticking a little bit.
That's true. Yeah.
There you go. So I put some seam side up, will open up, and then the flour, and some seam side down. So that's really, again, preference. But when the seam is down, obviously I need to, what did I need to plate now? It's somewhere. I need to score it. Oh, there we go. Thank you. And here I can give it just one cut, helping to open up the bread a little bit. So, open Number 2. Okay, the beeping was wrong because instead of 35 minutes, it was 5 minutes. For the top deck of the bread which is put in. So I'm just going to reset that. And here, same thing. So you can already see how actually the bread is coming up. This is the first one we put in, the whole grain spelt. So now we have the sprouted grain. And here's the same idea again, a baguette shape. And like I mentioned before, that's why the board makes it a little bit easier. And here I actually roll them in oats. That's just a preference. So obviously I want the oats on top, the seam side down. And there it's important not to hand anything that's like proofing on boards like this. You don't want to handle it too much, even though it has nice stability. You want to preserve the nice, fluffy, light interior as much as possible.
So I'm impressed by the resiliency of these loaves. You didn't put any dough conditioners?
I couldn't hear you. What?
Dough conditioners?
There's no dough conditioner in there, none whatsoever. This is the nice and great advantage of using masa madre.
That's very impressive. Usually by now with sprouted flour, we wouldn't see this kind of volume.
Yes, the sprouted has the tendency actually to use soak up a lot of water and then don't get that volume that you need.
Right.
It has a little bit of a less oven spring, I have to say, but it still has a good volume, I mean, for a sprouted. So now the bread itself obviously is not 100% sprouted because the flour portion of the masa madre ferment is white flour, even though I could have used something else. So if you do the math, it's probably 80% whole grain or sprouted, I want to say. And then you have that flour portion of the pre-ferment.
Got it.
You can see how stable it is. I mean, I can lift them up, and they're still stable.
Yeah,
they don't
that's
collapse.
pretty impressive. Usually sprouted doughs are not that resilient.
Exactly. So this one doesn't fit anymore because we only have a certain amount of space. So now all these sizes take about 35 minutes. They bake about 35 minutes for the 550, 600 grams that we did, 1.5 pounds. That is about a good amount of baking time to have a nice color, to have a good baked interior with a nice bottom, nice crust, nice crusty surface. And of course, the steam amount has to be right. That's important too. Mm-hmm. And what I usually do with everything that I bake artisan, that I want to have a good crust, the last 10 minutes of baking, I open the damper. So I have a really dry heat in the oven, so I can get that crust a little bit more of that crispness to it. Of course, that can be changed depending on what climate we are. If we are somewhere in the Caribbean where it's very humid, might be you want to open it already earlier. Or if it's a very dry heat down in Vegas, maybe not opening it at all. So that's something obviously you want to judge for yourself.
Okay.
And of course, what you like in the bread. If you like that nice crusty crusty texture.
Okay.
So that's the bit the part of how the bread looks when it's proofed, when it goes in the oven. We shaped it, we mixed one, and we have, that was actually prepared yesterday, so it's not 100% fresh, but obviously magic of TV, we have to do it in that way. And what you see here are the breads that we just made. This one is the sprouted wheat. This one is the whole grain spelt. Then right here we have the purple wheat. These are the regular artisan basic white country loaves. And then we also have the onion rye, which I did a little bit of a different scoring, but just as you saw it before, which is now in the oven.
Cool.
So,
I would like to request 2 of those to be cut. The sprouted one and the onion one, if you could.
absolutely, we can do that.
Because I'm so like really impressed with the sprouted. Yeah, look at the volume on there.
We couldn't bake, like I mentioned before. We could, because we don't have enough space in the oven. We still have our loaves of the basic white. These actually would be ready for the oven, but if I want to, because it's so stable, this is what I always talk about, I can bake them in 2 hours. I can just leave them here or put them in the refrigerator for a while and bake them when I need them. That's what makes it so interesting, this product. It's really stable and tolerant.
So,
and
these
about a half hour until this is ready, and then I can put them in the oven.
these formulas, they're pretty lean, right? They don't have sugar in them.
No, this is completely lean, no sugar.
So would it overproof if you have sugar in them?
I'm sorry?
Will it overproof if you have sugar in them?
Well, if you add sugar, yes, it's always food for the yeast. It's not directly fermentable sugar. It needs to be broken down first by the enzymes, natural enzymes that are in the flour for the yeast. So it's not a simple sugar. If you use sugar, you get a little sweetness. But in general, yes, it proofs it a little faster. That's for sure. It will always help.
I'm wondering if your masa madre can be used for, say, food service, you know, like Subway kind of refrigerated doughs, and it will never go like.
Well, what I noticed overall with all the tests we made is when it's refrigerated. So at this point, if I would now retard it, it works. But the next day or hours later, if I want to basically bake it, it'll take much longer to come back. So this is the.
I see. Okay, got it. Yeah, that's nice and tight.
In some ways, that wild yeast strain is really strong and stable and gives great flavor and all. But in the same time, it's sensitive to temperature. That means also if the masa madre ferment when it's prepared, if the temperature is too cold, it should stay at around 75. If it's too cold, it just doesn't develop as well. It just gets the next day. You can tell it's just not the same. And then in the final dough, it behaves differently too.
Mm-hmm.
It has that. In that respect, it has less tolerance to temperature. But in the final dough for fermentation, it's a different story, of course.
Okay.
So this is the whole grain spelt.
Nice. It's got more of an open crumb. Very good.
Then we have the purple wheat.
That's a pretty dark color, isn't it? Can't really
Yes.
see much purple in there.
It's not quite that purple.
Yeah.
Even though it is purple wheat, and then we have purple wheat flakes. You can see those little pieces there. So they turn white from the cutting, but they're actually pretty purple in
Interesting.
color. Yeah. And then we
So
have,
do you need to bake the purple wheat like at a lower temperature so it doesn't burn?
No, not at all. I put it in the oven just the same, like 430, 450, pretty hot. And then
Okay.
after 5 minutes, I turn it down, which I'm going to do right now. I'll turn it down to about 400. Come on. Falling heat is what's the key also to get a nice crust, nice developed crust, and good color. So yeah, this is the rye, the onion rye.
Oh, nice. The
And you can
onion seems to also open up the crumb grain, doesn't it?
yeah, could be that they because they're fried, that the fat of the onion itself sort of separate a little bit the crumb, and
Yeah, I think that's what it's doing. It's
yep.
nice.
So very nice, and the flavor is excellent too. And then we have the this is now that country loaf.
Wow, look at the crumb. That's nice.
So yeah, and I mean, you can hydrate it even higher and make ciabattas out of it, even though this one, like I said, is about 82%. With the obviously the entire water amount, when you factor in the masa madre ferment in the water, and the dough feels fairly soft but nice and stable. So you can actually go higher for ciabattas, for example. As you can see, when we shaped it before, it had nice stability. And we have it right here still. This is what we shaped before. So we can keep that in for another 2 hours if we want to, and then reshape it. I made long doughs here, which I would just do like this. Give it just a little fold. That's it. That's what I did with those. And this is basically now ready to go in the oven, like I said. But again, I can leave that here for another 2 hours without a problem. It will not collapse. It could dry out, so I could actually cover it with plastic so I don't get a dry surface, but it would not collapse, and it will give me a nice fluffy interior and a wonderful flavor. Just with basically flour, salt, and water, nothing else. No yeast, I mean no commercial yeast. So that's something to consider, of course. Not that yeast is a bad thing. No, commercial yeast is a completely natural product. Bakers have used it for many, many years, but way back then there was no commercial yeast, so they used actually their sourdoughs, which were treated in a way that they became active, and then they also, as a side effect, created acidity. That's just the side effect of fermentation, the organic acids that are created, which in this case doesn't have it. There is no organic acids. It's really just about the fermentation, the activity of the yeast without that acidity. So it's not, the masa madre ferment is not to be confused with a sourdough. I cannot make a San Francisco sourdough bowl with that, or so. It will not have that flavor. It's very aromatic, very flavorful, but mild. I call it mild, not acidic. So that's the difference.
My question is, what would you recommend an artisan baker to do? Do they have to start a masa madre starter every day, or do they keep some after the first production run and continue using that as a starter for the next batch?
What you do usually, it's designed to start every day.
Okay.
You always want to have a fresh batch with the right microorganism and that proper starter culture. But if you keep always a little bit something, then you can actually take it into the next day. What I do always when I make it over a period of time, many days, I always keep a little bit, and then the next day I actually use less masa madre. Technically, what we recommend is 10%. So I use 10 pounds of flour, 1 pound of masa madre, and then about 8.2 pounds of water. I mix it. This is my ferment for the next day. After the 14 to 18 hours, I can use it. Now, if I have something left, depends how much, then the next day I can actually go with only 5 or 6% So I'm saving there too, because I'm introducing from the day before the same strain. And I haven't tried it to actually go without fresh Masamat, just continuing it. Technically, it should work. But what happens then after a while, it will turn sour. That's the natural fermentation of a levain or of a sourdough, basically the way we know it. If it's refreshed every day, eventually it will turn sour. And with one, this will not turn sour. So it's really preference. If I want it sour, it's a different story, of course. A little bit of acidity is always good. But this one will give me just that nice fermentation that I need with the tolerance and the final dough, the texture, all those benefits, but without the acidity.
Interesting.
I get a lot.
That's good. Yeah.
Can I take another quick look in the ovens to see what things look like for now? We still have a little bit baking to go. So this is the whole grain spelt loaf. Here's one of the purple wheat loaves with the walnuts.
Nice.
We also just cut. Up there we have the beautiful, still very light, the beautiful onion rye. So now, at this point, this could be now something we can do. I take it out of the oven and freeze it, and I do a popping. The product would be, from the time, maybe a couple more minutes, would be basically baked through, that it has the stability it needs, and I could freeze it and then take it out when I need it and rebake it when it's when I'm ready to go. And here's the sprouted wheat. The sprouted wheat.
Nice.
So obviously it's not done yet.
I'm still impressed with the sprouted product because I've not seen, you know, a sprouted artisan product that holds so well.
Yep, that's right.
Process. Yeah.
So technically we're through our program that I had planned. If there's any questions, of course, we're available for that.
All right.
But we went through all the steps, the dough itself, then the way it's, when it's proofed, when it goes in the oven, and then of course now it's baking, and we saw already what it looks like when it's baked, but here's the fresh stuff.
Great. So Joanna, do we have any questions? Why don't you start, Joanna?
Okay. So one of the questions that came in, can I shorten my proof time by 10 minutes to buy me more space on the floor and have the product receive its remaining height in the oven through oven spring?
So I will answer that. I would advise a lot of the bakers out there to really use the proofing time to get to the required height. And that's because the more time you give it proofing, the more it will retain its size. Even though it gets some spring in the oven, sometimes a spring in the oven is going to collapse on cooling and on storage and packaging. So it's the best practice to not shorten the proofing time, but to keep the proofing time to keep that height. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Another one is, this one's more for Christoph, but did you use steam in the oven?
Did I use steam for the products?
Yeah.
Yes, I always use steam for artisan baking. It's almost a must. What it does, it gives you a baking environment that is a hot, moist air. So it moistens the surface of the dough when the highly proofed dough goes in the hot oven. If there would be no steam, it would be a dry heat. It would right away seize, and then it could actually create a thick skin that it could, because the pressure builds up inside still, the product could actually crack all over the place, even though it's scored. Now, with the steam, you get a nice, smooth, and soft surface, and the product can expand to its maximum volume. So I get a better volume. I get actually the cracks where I want them, where the spores are. And on top of it, I get a better caramelization. The Maillard reaction with the heat, it just creates more of those dextrins that actually give me that shiny, very thin, crispy crust. And of course, that can be manipulated, like I mentioned before.
Oof. Did he get frozen? Hey, Joanna, can you hear?
Yep, I'm here.
I think he is frozen.
I think so too. It looks like we lost them.
Okay, while we get them back, why don't we continue with the questions?
Okay. So another one was, what's your opinion on using Tangzong on artisan bread making?
Okay, so Tangzong method is a Japanese method where you take equal parts of water and flour and cook it up into a slurry. What that does, and there is a lot of misinformation out there on the internet on this, it really does nothing for the gluten. In fact, it deteriorates the gluten. The gluten becomes totally non-functional. Okay, so what happens is you're cooking the starch portion. You're gelatinizing the starch, you're swelling it, it's absorbing all this water. So if anything, the Tangzong method works on the starch molecule and keeps the bread softer longer so that you don't need extended shelf life solutions. Okay, so it can be used for artisan bread baking. It just takes an extra step. And because you're using hot slurry or a water roux, you're going to increase your usage of yeast or masa madre because you are going to like create some kind of burnout if you're not careful. Okay, so absolutely you can use the Tangzong method in producing artisan bread. It is definitely going to be beneficial for your shelf life.
Sounds good. Another one, can I use masa madre for frozen dough production?
Yes,
Christoph.
yes, I heard it. Yes, you can use masa madre, but you need to use more. That means you need to use more. First of all, not only the 10% to make the masa madre ferment the day before, you have to go up to about 15% for more strength, and you also have to use more in the final dough. So that requires to recalculate recipes to the right salt amount and everything. And then also the hydration part has to be basically readjusted as well.
Okay.
And but it's definitely usable. But then when it's actually, you mean frozen also as a frozen dough, obviously. So when it's defrosted, it's going to take much longer than a regular yeasted dough to come back to life and proof, and so it's a long process.
Got it.
Okay. Another question. Can I score before the proofing process?
Christoph, you want to take that or you want me to take that?
I can take that.
Sure.
Scoring before the proofing process, usually for artisan bread, it's not done because the bread will not look the way it should. The spores are not cracking because you open up the surface and the product actually proofs more. So it actually gives you a non-artisan look, I want to call it. Now there is breads, some certain pan breads that could actually be scored before to have maybe a nicer, rounder surface. I'm talking about mainly pan breads. But for artisan breads, I would not recommend that. Maybe Lynn, you have a different.
I wouldn't recommend it. I think the reason why you score is to give that nice design, the crisp design. And if you score before proofing, that's not gonna happen. Yeah, I would agree with you on that one.
Okay. Another question. How can I get a thinner, crispier crust?
Christoph.
Yep.
My guest.
A thinner, crispier crust.
Yep.
In my opinion, the thinner crust is actually with a little bit more steam. So that's all about the balance of the steam amount. And if just the right amount of steam gives you that longer expansion of the dough surface within the first 5 minutes of the baking process, and that's when it expands to the most, and it gives you that thin, shiny crust. Now, if it's too much, it could actually be a very soft, leathery crust because it's too thin. It's too much moisture that's built up. If it's not enough, the crust will be a little thicker. So the thin, crispy requires just the right amount of steam into the oven.
Also, do you think that has anything to do with the protein of the flour?
Yes, absolutely, totally. High gluten flours tend to have that balloon effect for big volume.
Yeah.
And many times it's sort of, I call it the balloon effect. They come up and then sort of shrinks a little bit down.
Yeah.
Gives you also that sort of leathery and chewy crust, and the crispy crust is sort of missing. So too high protein flour is not necessarily favorable for that.
I agree with that. A weaker flour with
Flour.
a right amount of steam is going to give you a thinner, crispier crust.
Combo.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a question about flour. So this year, Canadian wheat has a low falling number. What would you recommend to not accelerate fermentation on the baking process because the enzymatic activity of the flour?
Can you repeat that question again?
Yes. So this year, Canadian wheat has a low falling number. What is your recommendation on not accelerating fermentation on the baking process because the enzymatic activity on the flour?
So there is not enough enzymatic activity, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but there's lack of enzymatic activity. That's why there is a low falling number. Accelerate fermentation. Not sure why you want to accelerate the fermentation. Can you explain why you want to accelerate the fermentation? Because I'm not so sure what the question is. I mean, if that's a low falling number, it just means that you don't have enough enzymes in it. I mean, malt can cure that really fast. If you want your falling number to be at an optimum level and you don't have enough enzymes, just add malt. And I do not think malt will accelerate the fermentation. Christoph, do you have any opinion on this? Will malt enhance fermentation or accelerate fermentation?
Well, malts are sugars, yes, and then it can, but mainly the diastatic malts that are enzyme active are the ones that actually help much more in fermentation. The non-diastatic malts, which we use in many of our products, help in flavor, also a little bit of the caramelization of the crust. A little bit kind of like dextrose. We use dextrose and malts, non-diastatic malts, for appearance, for the flavor of the crust, for the color of the crust. But fermentation are the diastatic malts. They help a lot in there.
So my question to Jose is, what are you using right now to deal with the lack of enzymes in there? That's my question for you.
The lack of enzymes of what?
Yeah, because Jose is asking what solutions we could have if the Canadian wheat doesn't have enough enzymes in it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So he had a follow-up comment that low falling number means high enzymatic activity.
The higher the falling number, the lower the enzymatic activity. Yes.
Yes, that's correct. I got it. Opposite. All right. So
A very high falling number is not necessarily a good thing either. It should be right where we like it. Usually 250 up to 350. That's what I usually like. But to make up for that, I usually, like I said, the diastatic malts are a good idea. What I also like to do, because naturally it has more enzymatic activity, I actually like to add a little bit rye flour. So I usually go with a 97 to 3% ratio, just adding a little bit rye flour, especially the medium or dark rye. It has naturally more enzymatic activity, so I make up for the lack in the white flour. Obviously, I don't want to go too high, otherwise the flour could turn dark or the bread will be too dark. But it's a good option to do that. A little bit rye flour, 3 to maximum 5%.
Yeah, so my follow-up question to Jose is, what are you using right now that's affecting your fermentation? I would definitely ask my flour supplier to really mix up the flour to target the specified falling number. Working this way in a large scale production is going to hurt everything. Like, there's nothing you can do on your side really much to add in any kind of additives or dough conditioner to really prevent that collapse after proofing. If you have a lot of enzymes in there, that's where it's going to affect it. So my solution would be to go back to your flour supplier and demand a COA and demand that they fall within the falling number. And they're the ones who can manipulate that for you. They can go back to their flour blends and blend with something that does not have as much enzymes. Okay. So yeah, I hope that helps. I really don't think you can add anything on your end at the bakery to improve your production quality based on a low falling number. There's no cure to that. All right.
Okay. Probably have time for one or two more questions. So if you had any last things you wanted to cover, go ahead and type those in. So another question, what would you recommend to monitor the humidity of my oven?
Okay, so I did a whole episode on that, episode 30. So Scorpion has a oven humidity sensor and logger. So does BakeWatch and Mole. Mini mole. So you can use those to monitor the humidity of your oven. And that's important because you need to know how to get rid of the humidity. If you don't get rid of the humidity, if you put in too much water, then your baking times are going to be affected and the crust quality is going to be affected. So two things, Scorpion or BakeWatch. Mini mole. Okay? Check out those two on the internet.
Okay, and then one more question. What temperature and time should I bake my rye bread to?
Christoph, do you want to take that question?
I'm putting breads in the oven, so can you repeat it?
Yes. What temperature and time should I bake my rye bread to?
Temperature and time. Well,
yeah, because rye bread usually have a lot of moisture.
Yes, a lot of moisture. It's always good. So a little bit more steam than for others. Again, the rye bread, I actually like, especially the artisan style. I like to go start with a high temperature, not quite as high as the white products, but around 420, 430, and then a lot of steam. And then right away, about 2-3 minutes into the bake, I turn it down to 400. 390 and finish the bake at that temperature.
So what's the time period? Usually 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 45?
It depends on the size of the loaf. If I do a 1.5 pounder, which we did today, it's 35 minutes. If I do a little heavier, obviously, the heavier I go, the lower the temperature, the longer it takes. If I make little rye rolls or small demi baguette, rye baguettes, rustic baguettes or something, I can go a little bit higher in temperature and a little bit lower in time.
Right, and I also believe that I've seen rye bread, 100% rye bread being baked for, I think, 90 minutes at a really low temperature.
Yep, Germany is very well known for the northern part of Germany and the Nordic countries in general, Denmark, Sweden, for 100% rye bread. And that takes a fairly long time to bake, of course. It's very heavy, very dense, because rye bread just doesn't have that same gluten matrix. It contains gluten, but it's just not the same in terms of the texture. It's heavy, it's dense, has a great shelf life, has many different health benefits compared to wheat, vitamins, minerals, but it takes much longer to bake because it actually absorbs much more water. It's higher hydration, so it takes longer to bake that loaf. The more rye, the more water, the longer it takes.
Great. All right. Do we have any more, Joanna? I think it's time for us to conclude.
Yeah, I think that is all that we have time for today.
And just to let everyone know, we are issuing certificates for attendance today. And what do those certificates do? Well, basically collect them, and we will determine once you have collected enough certificates what we're gonna do for you, okay? But in order to get today's certificates, you have to answer these questions. Joanna,
Yes.
let's see what questions you have for them.
Let's see what we learned today. All right. So we have these 3 questions, multiple choice, A through D. 1, what is one of the important attributes of a farinograph? 2, what is the purpose of fermentation? And 3, what is the leavening system in Abel and Schaefer's masa madre formula?
All right, where do they send the answers to, Joanna?
Yes, so send me your choices for 1, 2, and 3. You can send them to support@BAKERpedia.com. And if you'd like me, I can send you the questions to your email if you're interested in getting them that way as well. And we will get you your certificate.
That's easy. If you're not asleep by now, you should be able to answer these. All right. So thank you, Christoph, for showing us how to bake with masa madre. And thank you, Joanna, for making sure everybody comes and the technology works behind this. And we are going to post our next BAKERview up soon. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. We will see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.